porch light was out. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the bags, not the cold, the dead bulb over the door my father had been meaning to replace since October. It was 17 degrees. 6:40 in the evening, December 22nd. I remember the exact time because my phone screen lit up when I dropped my keys trying the lock a third time, and the clock told me before the error told me the key didn't fit. 4 black garbage bags sat on the top step, tied at the top the way my mother ties bags when she wants you to know she didn't want to touch what's inside them too long. My winter coat was folded on top of the nearest one, like that was supposed to be a kindness. The door opened 4 inches, chain still on, my father's face in the gap. "This was never your home, Nora," he said. "Not really." Then the door closed, and the deadbolt turned, and I stood on a porch I had helped pay for, and listened to my own family go back to their dinner. But here's what none of them knew. Standing in that warm kitchen, I wasn't just their daughter. I was the reason the house still had a kitchen to stand in. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Nora Callahan, 34, a title examiner and real estate attorney from Dayton, Ohio. This is the story of how my parents locked me out of a house I'd been quietly paying for since 2019, and how a stranger on that porch ended up being the reason the whole thing came apart in front of everyone who'd stayed silent about it. If this sounds like something you've lived, drop a comment. And subscribe. You're going to want to see how this ends. I was the older one. Tyler was the golden one. That's not bitterness. It's just the ledger. By the time I was 10, I understood the accounting of my house without anyone explaining it to me. My report cards went on the refrigerator for exactly as long as it took my mother to need the magnet for something else. Tyler's went in a frame in the hallway, even the ones with C's, because, as my mother put it once, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd note a weather pattern, Tyler needs the encouragement. You've always been fine on your own. I have never forgotten that sentence. I've turned it over more times than I've turned over anything a client ever signed. I worked. At 14, I was babysitting 3 nights a week for the Halloran family down the street. And by 16, I had a second job doing filing at a law office on Saturdays. Because I'd figured out by then that if I wanted a car, a class ring, a trip with the debate team, it was coming out of my own hours, not my parents' checkbook. I kept a spiral notebook, I still have it, where I tracked every dollar I earned between 14 and 18. $11,340. I know that number the way other people know their own birthday. My grandmother, Ruth, was the one adult in that house who ever asked to see the notebook. She'd sit with me at her kitchen table on Sunday afternoons, reading the columns like they were a report card that actually mattered, and she'd say the same thing every time. "You keep better books than your father's whole company, Nora." I didn't understand yet that she meant it as more than a compliment. She was taking attendance. She was the only one. Tyler got a truck for his 16th birthday. Brand new. My father took out a loan for it and told the extended family at Easter that he'd always believe in investing in his son's confidence. I got a bus pass and a part-time schedule that let me keep both jobs. Nobody framed that as an investment in anything. It was just assumed the way weather is assumed. There's a trophy that still sits on the mantle of that house. My regional debate championship. Sophomore year, the year I beat 2 seniors from a private school on a coin flip of a final round. I remember my hands shaking so badly accepting it that the moderator had to steady the plaque for the photo. My mother wasn't at that tournament. She was at Tyler's junior varsity basketball game, which he didn't play in, because he was benched the whole season. She has moved my trophy 4 times in 11 years. Always to make room for something of Tyler's. A participation medal, a photo from his gym's grand opening, a printed certificate from a 2-day sales seminar. It's currently on the bottom shelf of a bookcase in the guest room, behind a candle. Nobody in that family has said the words, "We're proud of you," to me since I was 17 years old, and I only remember that because I wrote it down, the way I write everything down. It's the job. You learn to notice what's on the record, and what's been quietly removed from it. When I was 18, my grandmother gave me $100 in an envelope for graduation, with a note that said, "For the girl who never needed reminding." Tyler, that same June, got a car detailing package and a framed photo of himself with the high school principal, because my mother had arranged a small write-up in the town paper about his promising future. a future that never once required him to manage anything. That's the imbalance. It didn't start with a slammed door. It started with a trophy moving 4 times, and a bus pass, and a woman at a kitchen table who was the only one keeping score honestly. In March of 2019, my father lost his job. 22 years at a machine parts distributor, gone in a restructuring that made the local paper for a week and then never again. He was 59. Nobody was hiring 59-year-old plant supervisors at his old salary, and everybody in the family knew it, and nobody said it out loud, because saying it out loud would have meant admitting the mortgage was 6 weeks from default. I found out because my mother called me. Not to ask, just to talk. The way she does when she needs someone to absorb a feeling without acknowledging she's asking for help. She mentioned the number almost in passing. $1,840 a month. Insurance and taxes on top of that, another $410. I did the math before she finished the sentence, the way I do math for a living. I set up an LLC that April. Callahan Property Solutions. Nothing dramatic. Just a shell to route a payment through so it didn't look like their daughter was carrying them. I told my mother it was a housing assistance program, first time in hardship cases. We're a beneficiary partner of a state fund. She never asked a single follow-up question. She wanted the explanation that let her not think about it, and I gave her one. For the next 6 years, on the 3rd of every month, $250 left my account and landed in theirs, framed as an assistance disbursement. I have every wire transfer logged in a spreadsheet with the LLC's name on it. Going back to April 2019, by this December, the running total was $186,400. I never told them it was me. I told myself that was generosity. Looking back, some of it was generosity. Some of it, I think now, was hope. That eventually they'd ask where the money really came from, and I'd get to hear them say thank you to my face instead of to a program that didn't exist. They never asked. Tyler, during those same 6 years, started 3 businesses. A CrossFit gym that lasted 11 months, closed after a dispute with the landlord. That my father quietly settled for $6,000. In cash, he told my mother was for car repairs. A protein bar, company that never shipped a single case but burned through $14,000 in packaging design. Now it was an app, some kind of fitness tracking platform. He described at every family dinner with a new word he'd learned: that weak, scalable, disruptive, pre-seed. My parents had put $40,000 of their own savings into it by that November. Savings that existed, unbeknownst to them, only because I'd been covering their mortgage for 6 years. I want to be precise about what those 6 years actually looked like, because quiet years makes it sound peaceful. And it wasn't peaceful, it was just silent. Every 3rd of the month, I sat at my kitchen table and moved $2,250 into an account with a name on it that wasn't mine. And then I went back to my own life like I hadn't just spent 1/3 of my take-home pay keeping 2 adults' roof over their heads. I didn't buy a house of my own during those years. I didn't take a vacation that cost more than a long weekend. I told myself it was temporary. My father would find work. The number would shrink. It never shrank. By year 3, it had become the baseline. The thing everyone in that house implicitly assumed would simply continue. The way you assume gravity will continue. I sat through 4 Thanksgivings where my mother introduced me to guests as my daughter. She does something with houses. And introduced Tyler as our son, the entrepreneur, in the same room, the same breath. I sat through a christening for my cousin's baby in 2021, where my father toasted the 2 providers in this family, and meant Tyler and himself, out loud while I stood 4 feet away holding a gift I'd bought with money that, again, existed only because I'd kept their mortgage current that spring. I sat through a church potluck in 2022 where Denise Callahan told the whole table, cheerfully, that Nora never really settled into anything. But that's all right. Some people just aren't built for a family life. While I was 3 years into being the only reason there was a family, a life and a table to sit at, I didn't correct her. That was the discipline. You don't correct people who aren't ready to hear the correction. You document and you wait. I went home that night and added the potluck comment to a running note on my phone, time-stamped. The way I'd been time-stamping small cruelties for 2 years by then, without fully admitting to myself why. December 19th, 3 days before Christmas Eve, the family had gathered a few days early, because Tyler was flying out to a fintech conference on the 23rd and wanted his moment before he left. I brought a store-bought pie because I'd worked a closing until 7 that afternoon. Small thing, it mattered later. Dinner ran normal until my father cleared his throat. In that way, that means he's about to make an announcement. He's rehearsed. Tyler's app needed another $60,000 to make it to a Series A conversation, and my parents wanted to co-sign a home equity loan against the house to cover it. Not ask me to contribute, co-sign. On a house they believed was fully theirs. I said no, calmly. I said the app had no revenue and no path to one that I could see, and that using the house as collateral for it was not something I could support, professionally or otherwise. My mother's face did the thing it does. A tightening, a recalibration. The look of someone deciding how to punish a refusal without naming it as punishment. My father set down his fork, deliberately, the tines aligned with the edge of his plate. An old habit of his, and one I would end up using myself before that year was out, without meaning to borrow it. Tyler said nothing. He didn't need to. He just looked at the tablecloth like a man watching a verdict get read that he already knew the outcome of. My mother said, "After everything this family has done for you, this is what we get," I asked her evenly. What exactly the family had done for me lately. It wasn't rhetorical. I genuinely wanted the answer on record, the way I want every claim on record before I respond to it. She didn't have one. She reached instead for the oldest one available to her. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. And I've put a roof over yours for 6, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out flat, almost gentle, which I think unsettled her more than anger would have. She didn't understand the sentence yet. Nobody at that table did. That was the last calm moment before the room changed. That's when my father said it. The line I'd carry into every room I walked into for the next year. "This was never your home, Nora." "Not really. You've always just been passing through it." Nobody at that table said anything to stop him. My Aunt Carol looked at her plate. My Uncle Reggie asked Tyler a question about the flight to Austin like the previous 90 seconds hadn't happened. I stood up, folded my napkin. I remember doing that, folding it, setting it beside the plate the way you'd close a file, and I left without raising my voice. 3 days later, they changed the locks. I didn't call. I didn't post anything. What I did was open my laptop that same night, from Mrs. Okafor's guest room down the street, where I ended up sleeping after that porch, and I logged into the LLC's bank portal and stopped the automatic transfer scheduled for January 3rd. Then I called the insurance carrier that held their homeowners policy, the one I'd been quietly listed as a secondary contact on since the LLC took over payments and removed myself from the SO account. Then I pulled the file. I'd been keeping in a drawer at my office for exactly this kind of day, the recorded assignment of the deed of trust. 6 years earlier, when I first started covering the mortgage, the lender required a formal assignment naming who held the beneficial interest in the note if the payer wasn't the borrower of record. My parents had signed it without reading it, the way people sign things when they're relieved someone else is solving their problem. That assignment named Callahan Property Solutions LLC, which meant it named me. I didn't call a lawyer, because I am one, technically, in every way that mattered for this. I drafted a formal notice of discontinued third-party payment, sent it to the mortgage servicer, and copied my parents' address. 30 days. That's what the note required before the obligation reverted fully to the named borrowers. No rage in any of it. Just arithmetic. A house cost $2,660 a month to carry, and as of January 3rd, that number was going to belong entirely to the 2 people who'd told me I was never really in it. By January 8th, the story that reached the extended family was that Nora had cut off her own parents in their retirement over some disagreement about Tyler's career. My mother posted something on Facebook about family loyalty and hard seasons that never named me, but the 31 relatives understood immediately, complete with a photo of the house decorated for Christmas, lights still up, as though the scene on that porch had never happened 3 feet from that same doorway. Aunt Carol texted me to ask if I was doing okay mentally, which I understood even then, as a kindness clumsily delivered rather than an accusation. My cousin Denise's sister-in-law, whom I have met twice in my life, sent a message that just said, "Praying for your family." which I read 4 times trying to figure out whether it was meant for me or about me. A woman from my mother's church group called me directly, the week after New Year's, to check in, and spent 11 minutes describing how worried everyone was about the tension I'd apparently caused, without once asking me a single question about what had actually happened. I let her finish. I thanked her for calling. I did not correct the record for her either. She wasn't calling for the truth. She was calling to have been the one who reached out, and I'd learned by then that those are 2 different visitors, and only one of them is worth opening the door for. I didn't respond to any of it publicly. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled simply Record, and I put everything in it, every wire transfer, the insurance removal, the notice to the servicer, screenshots of the Facebook post, a dated note about what my father said at the table, timestamped the night it happened, from memory, while it was still exact. I added the churchwoman's call to it too. A single line, no editorializing. I didn't send any of it to anyone. I just kept it complete. The way you keep a file complete when you don't yet know which document in it is going to matter most. At work, my supervisor asked once gently if everything was all right. I'd been quieter than usual. I told her yes, and thanked her for asking, and went back to the title search I was running for a foreclosure file on Elm Terrace. It's a strange comfort, doing that job while your own family's finances are unraveling 3 miles away. You start to see your own life as a set of recorded instruments, the way you'd see anyone else's. The file on Elm Terrace wasn't the one that broke things open. That happened 2 weeks later on a Tuesday, when I finally sat down to do something I'd been putting off since my grandmother died in 2021. Settle the last of her estate paperwork, which had been sitting untouched in a banker's box in my closet for 3 years, because grief makes you slow. My grandmother, Ruth Callahan, not the Ruth Bell I'll get to, had raised my father in that house before it ever became my parents' house in anyone's mind. She'd left it to me, explicitly. I had the original will, drawn up in 2018 by an attorney named Harold Pruitt, 3 years before she died, leaving the house and the 1/4 acre it sat on to my granddaughter, Nora Elizabeth Callahan, in recognition of years of care she alone provided me, to be held such that her parents may reside there during their lifetimes but may not sell, encumber, or transfer the property without her consent. I had never filed it. She'd asked me not to. Let your father think it's his for now. It'll cause a war otherwise. I'll tell him myself when I'm ready. And then a stroke took her before she was ready, and grief took the next 3 years from me, and the box sat in my closet. What I found in the box that Tuesday wasn't the will. It was a quitclaim deed, dated 4 months before my grandmother died, transferring the house from Ruth Callahan to Carl and Denise Callahan for $1 and other good and valuable consideration. Notarized. Signed. My grandmother's signature on it. I know my grandmother's signature the way I know my own. I'd watched her sign birthday cards for 30 years. This was close. It was not right. The R curled the wrong direction. The V had a hook at the base she never made. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Ruth Bell, no relation. A longtime family friend who ran a shipping and notary storefront 2 towns over, and who, I would learn within the week, had not seen my grandmother in person in the 11 months before that document was signed. Because my grandmother's mobility had made the drive impossible. I called Ruth Bell myself, using my title company credentials, framing it as a routine chain of title verification, the kind of call I make a dozen times a month for files that have nothing to do with me personally. She remembered the transaction, barely, and told me without prompting that Carl had brought the paperwork by already signed and asked her to just notarize it as a favor. She'd already agreed to it over the phone. You know how close we all are. Ruth Bell had known my grandmother for 40 years. She had trusted my father completely. The way people in small towns trust a man who mows his lawn on schedule and waves from his truck. She had also, without realizing it, just confessed on a recorded verification line to notarizing a document she never witnessed being signed, which under Ohio law is not a technicality. It's fraud, and it exposed her license the moment the words left her mouth. I sat with that recording for 2 full days before I did anything else with it. Not because I doubted it. I'd run enough fraudulent conveyance files to know exactly what I was looking at within the first 10 seconds of the call. But because some part of me needed to grieve, Again, a version of my father I had apparently never actually had. The man who'd raised me had forged his own mother's signature to take a house she'd specifically, deliberately, in writing, left to someone else. I don't know how long I sat at my desk with the office lights off before I opened the file back up. My ally in all of this ended up being my own supervisor, Denise Halbrook, no relation to my mother, a coincidence I still find strange enough to mention every time I tell this story, who I finally told the whole thing to that week. After 3 years of silence about my own family's finances at a company where I reviewed other people's family finances all day. She'd handled forged deed cases before, more than a few. She looked at the will, the quitclaim, and the notary statement for about 4 minutes in total silence, before she said quietly, "Nora, you don't have a family dispute. You have a title defect and a fraud claim, and you happen to also have the emotional version of both, but only one of those is going to hold up in front of a judge. So let's build that one first." That was the moment the story stopped being about walking away from people who'd hurt me. It became about setting a record straight that had been wrong for 3 years and that only I had the tools to fix. And Denise, methodically, over the following week, helped me turn a grief I didn't know how to hold into a filing I knew exactly how to build. I filed the will for probate the following week. Late. But Ohio law allows it, and Harold Pruitt, still practicing at 71, remembered drafting it and was glad to testify to my grandmother's intent. I filed a formal title claim disputing the quitclaim deed based on the forged notarization, supported by Ruth Bell's own statement. I requested, and received, a lis pendens on the property, a public notice attached to the title record that the ownership was legally contested. Anyone doing a title search on that house from that point forward would see it, which mattered enormously, because on February 2nd, I learned my parents had listed the house for sale, $340,000 asking price. An open house scheduled for December 22nd the following winter felt like poetry to me later. But this was February. An open house scheduled that Saturday, with a target close date before spring. All of it to fund Tyler's next infusion into the app, and I suspect, to get ahead of whatever they sensed I might eventually do about the mortgage. I didn't stop the open house. I let it proceed. I contacted the listing agent directly, identified myself professionally, and informed her that the property had an active lis pendens and a contested chain of title. Information she was legally obligated to disclose to any serious buyer, and information that once disclosed would collapse any offer instantly. Then I did one more thing. I asked to attend the open house myself, not as Nora, their daughter, but in my professional capacity, as the title examiner of record flagging the defect. I brought Ruth Bell's signed statement. I brought the will. I brought the assignment of the deed of trust, showing 6 years of payments that had, in the servicer's own records, kept the loan out of default the entire time my parents believed they were carrying it alone. I want to be honest about the week leading up to that Saturday, because it wasn't calm the way I'm describing it now, in hindsight. It was calm on the outside, and it cost me something on the inside to keep it that way. My father tried to head me off twice before that Saturday. One voicemail. Tuesday night, threatening to handle this as a family matter, not a business one. His voice doing the thing it does when he's frightened and trying to sound authoritative instead. One text from my mother Thursday morning that said only, "We can fix this if you just come to dinner." As though 6 years of silent payments and a forged deed were a misunderstanding that could be resolved over pot roast. I didn't respond to either. I read the voicemail transcript once and I closed the laptop, the way I'd learned to close it on every provocation since December. I did call Harold Pruitt that week, my grandmother's attorney, to confirm he'd testify to her intent if the probate filing was challenged. He remembered her clearly. Ruth Callahan knew exactly what she wanted. And she wanted it in your name, Nora. She told me why. And I wrote it down. And that sentence alone did more to steady me than anything else that week. I also drove out to see Ruth Bell in person, not to accuse her, but because 40 years of friendship with my grandmother meant she deserved to hear what her signature had been used for from a person, not a subpoena. She cried in her own shop for 10 minutes. She surrendered her notary commission the following Monday, before anyone made her. By Friday night, I had every document organized into a single binder, tabbed, dated, indexed the way I index a closing file, and I laid it on my kitchen table next to the brass key my grandmother had given me at 12. I didn't sleep much that night. I don't think I was supposed to. If you've ever been the one holding an entire family together with money nobody thanked you for, stay with me, because this is the part I've replayed the most. The open house had 11 people in it by 11 a.m. Aunt Carol, Uncle Reggie, 2 neighbors, the listing agent, a young couple who'd driven 40 minutes to look at it, and my parents, standing in the kitchen like hosts at a party for a house they'd stolen. Tyler was there too, filming a segment for his own social media about family real estate wins to promote the app to investors. A detail I only appreciated the irony of afterward. There was a plate of shortbread on the counter. My mother had put out the good tablecloth, the one she used for Easter. The house smelled like cinnamon and floor cleaner, the smell of a place staged to look like nothing bad had ever happened inside it. I sat in my car outside for 4 minutes before I went in. Not out of doubt, out of the same discipline that had gotten me through 6 years of silent transfers. You do not walk into a room like this on emotion. You walk in on a plan, and you let the emotion happen to other people. I walked in at 11:15, beander under one arm. My mother's face did the thing again. The tightening around the eyes I'd been watching my whole life without ever having a word for it until that year. My father said my name like a question, the shortbread plate frozen halfway to a neighbor's hand. I didn't raise my voice. I introduced myself to the listing agent, formally by my title, and asked if the LAS pendants notice had been disclosed to the interested buyers in the room. The agent, visibly uncomfortable, admitted it had not yet been mentioned. I told the room, evenly, that the property currently listed for sale had a legally contested chain of title, based on a quitclaim deed I believed to be forged, and I held up Ruth Bell's signed statement. Not read it aloud, just held it. The way you hold evidence you don't need to perform. My father said, "This is not the place, Nora." That was the phrase he'd used at Thanksgiving, too. Roughly, a version of "you don't belong here" dressed as decorum. I said, "You're right. It's not the place for a lie. It's exactly the place for the truth, since you invited 11 witnesses to hear it." My mother's voice cracked on the word, "please." Tyler, filming this whole thing on his phone for his own content, lowered it slowly, realizing what he was capturing. I told them, calmly, in front of everyone, that I had paid $186,400 toward their mortgage over 6 years through an LLC they never questioned, that I held the recorded assignment of the note, and that the house they were trying to sell had been left to me, not them, by a woman who loved my father enough to let him live in it, but not enough to let him take it from someone who'd actually shown up for her at the end. My father repeated, quietly, almost to himself, the same words he'd used the night he locked me out. This was never your home. Except this time, standing in a kitchen full of witnesses who now understood exactly what he meant by it, it didn't sound like a dismissal. It sounded like a confession. The sale collapsed within the hour. The young couple left without a word, the wife pulling the husband's sleeve toward the door before the listing agent could even finish her sentence. The listing agent withdrew the listing that afternoon, citing the title defect in writing, and later told me privately she'd suspected something for weeks but had no standing to ask, and no idea it would be this specific, or this large. Within 4 months, the ledger settled itself the way ledgers do when you finally let them. My parents' listing agreement was formally terminated with a breach of disclosure note on file, which followed the listing agent's brokerage, but, more importantly, followed my parents' name in the county's real estate records. The probate court confirmed the 2018 will as controlling in April. The quitclaim deed was voided by court order in June, on the basis of fraudulent notarization, a 2-line ruling that undid 3 years of quiet theft in under a page. Ruth Bell surrendered her notary commission voluntarily rather than face a state investigation, which spared her prosecution, but ended a 40-year business built on being the woman in town everyone trusted with their signatures. My father was referred to the county prosecutor's office for review on the forged instrument. He ultimately accepted a deferred plea and 18 months of probation, avoiding a felony record he otherwise wouldn't have survived at 62, though he did lose his volunteer position at the church, quietly, without anyone needing to explain why. My mother was not charged, There was no evidence she'd known the deed was forged, only that she'd benefited from it, which the law, unlike a family, is willing to distinguish. My parents moved out of the house by August, into a rental across town, at market rate, for the first time in 6 years, paying their own way without anyone's silent help. Tyler's app folded that spring anyway. No forgery needed to end it. Just no revenue, same as it always had. The $40,000 gone the way all of it had always been going to go. I kept the house. I finished paying it off with the money that would have been theirs, and title now sits in my name exactly as my grandmother intended it 3 years too late. Aunt Carol called me in July, the first family member to do so, and said simply, "I should have said something at that dinner table." I'm sorry I didn't. I told her I understood why she hadn't. And I meant it. Some silences are cowardice. Some are just the shape fear takes in ordinary people, and I've stopped needing everyone to be brave to forgive them for being human. The mantle where my debate trophy used to get moved for Tyler's things is a different mantle now. It's mine. The trophy sits on it permanently, front and center, next to a small brass skeleton key. That key was my grandmother's. She gave it to me when I was 12. An old original lock key from when the house was built in 1954, long since replaced by a modern deadbolt, useless for actually opening anything. She told me, "This house will always let you in. Nora, whatever they tell you later, you remember I said that." I'd kept it in a drawer for 22 years without understanding why it mattered so much to her that I have it. It's July now. 7 months since the porch, since the garbage bags, since the 17-degree evening a stranger named Walter, walking his dog past Mrs. Okafor's house, saw me sitting on those steps with 4 black bags and stopped to ask if I was all right. A small kindness from someone who owed me nothing, which is more than my own parents managed that night. He helped me carry the bags to Mrs. Okafor's porch 2 doors down. I never got his last name. I think about him more than I think about my father, most weeks. I had a new lock installed on the house this spring. The old brass style, a reproduction, the kind my grandmother would have recognized. I gave a copy of the key to Mrs. Okafor. I gave one to Ruth Halbrook, my supervisor, who'd told me the truth about my own situation before I was ready to hear it plainly. I gave one to Aunt Carol because an apology, even a late one, deserves an answer. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up when the lock actually needs turning. If you've ever been the one everyone counted on and nobody counted, you already know how this feels. The particular quiet of finally being believed. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below if you've ever kept a record nobody knew you were keeping. And subscribe. There's another one of these waiting for you next week.